You should get another because I'll make you a producer. How I do this. I am going to make you her name should be Eliza. Yeah, you can go ahead and do that by the time you get it posted. Oh, Steve, we got a world of it. Okay, hi everybody. I'm just going to get Eliza set up. I think I have to make her a producer so she can be on camera. So give me just a moment. And I'm going to do the same. There she is, all lovely and yellow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me get myself up there with you. Okay, wonderful. Now I have to say I'm a little bit embarrassed because I'm in San Diego and it's 70 degrees and sunny, and I'm talking to the First Lady of Iceland, and I've got my space heater and my heavy coat on.
Well, there's been a blizzard here today. It's very, very cold today, but sunny.
Oh my gosh, that is funny. Okay, well, I hope you're cozy and warm inside.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, Firesiders, and welcome to Adventures by the Book, where our mission is to connect people and communities through the magic and power of books. I'm your host, Susan Macbeth, and I'm delighted to be hosting today a very special VIP guest, Eliza Reid, the First Lady of Iceland, to talk about her new book, Secrets of the, let's see if I say it right, Sprawcar. Perfect. Okay. But before we get started chatting with her, I want to take a few minutes to get the virtual audience acquainted with some of the techniques of Fireside for those who are new. For those of you who are regulars, welcome back, and you know the routine. For those of you who are new to Fireside, you can click on the black circular button on the lower left-hand portion of your screen, and that gives you the choice to invite yourself up on stage if you have questions or comments for Eliza. You can also click on the React button on the right side of your screen. And if there's something you particularly that resonates with you, you can clap or give a heart. Once you do that, you also can type a message in the chat button, and that will appear, and our staff will be monitoring that if you have questions and don't want to come up on stage. And I think that's pretty much it. You can follow Eliza. You can click on her emoji up on top and follow her so that anytime she's on Fireside, and I do hope she comes back, you'll get notification of any events that she does on Fireside. And you can do the same for me. We do weekly programs on Fireside. So that's kind of the basics. I'd like to also welcome those of you who are joining us live on our Fireside public profile page, and also those of you who are tuning in live to any of our social media channels. I am super excited to be chatting today with the First Lady of Iceland, Eliza Reid, about her new book, Secrets of the Sprawcar, One Small Island Nation, the Women Who Live There, and How They Are Changing the World, which, as I mentioned, has not even been released yet. Oh, yes, it's a beauty. So it's kind of a little pre-launch party. The book actually doesn't release until Tuesday, so this is her first event, and I'm very honored that you're here with us today. First Lady Eliza Reid grew up in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and attended the University of Toronto for a bachelor's in international relations, and then went on to attend Oxford University to complete an MA in modern history. She met and married, okay, tell us the name in Icelandic.
I'll just say the English pronunciation. It's so much easier. Gudni Johannesson.
Okay, Gudni. I can say that. Gudni
Like think
Johannesson.
of good and the knee on your leg.
Perfect.
Gudni.
Okay. How would you say that in Icelandic with the accent?
With the accent, you would say Guðni. which took me months and months to learn.
Okay, I guess for now we'll stick to Goodney.
I think since we want to talk about the book and not just his name, we should, just say Goodney.
Absolutely, absolutely. She moved to Iceland, became the First Lady when her husband was elected president of Iceland. They have 4 children, and in addition to her work as a wife, mother, First Lady, co-founder of the renowned Icelandic Writers Retreat, which we'll talk about a little bit too, journalist, activist for women's rights, gender equality. Honestly, I could spend the entire hour talking about all her accomplishments, but I know we want to talk about her book. So welcome, Eliza Reid, First Lady of Iceland.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. I love that there's these little clap sounds that come up. That's kind of exciting.
Isn't it cool?
It's really cool, yeah. So,
Yeah.
Go
ahead. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, for those of you who don't know, if you want to move your video around, you just put your finger on the video. You can move the image, the video. You can also shrink it by making, you touch it with your little finger and shrink it, or you can expand it to make it bigger if you want to see Eliza close up. So congratulations on the new book. I'm excited to talk to you about it and honored that this is your very first event. So before we get into the book, though, for those who listen in regularly, I always like to talk first about your trajectory as a writer. So I bet you when you were a little girl, you never imagined living in Canada that this would be your life one day. And I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about your life in Canada and your early years in terms of how books and writing first influenced you.
Mm-hmm. And just thank you so much for inviting me. I have to say this is a great introduction into doing book events. My first book event of my first book, and I'm sitting in this cozy chair in my house wearing a cozy Icelandic top. And maybe that's a nice introduction that I didn't have to spend a long, long time, doing hair and makeup. Not that I didn't put on a little bit for all of you, but, maybe not quite the same process as one other person. But to answer your question, yes, I grew up on what we like to call a hobby farm just outside of Ottawa. And a hobby farm being the fact that it was very rural. My parents had sheep and chickens and ducks, but they didn't work full time as farmers. It wasn't their income. My mother always stayed at home with us. I have 2 younger brothers, and my father is an English teacher, and he taught high school English literature and also lectured at the university in English literature. So we definitely grew up with a lot of books in the house and a lot of talks around the dinner table on books and on literature. And when I was a little girl, I started reading very actively from a young age. I loved especially reading Agatha Christie books. They really scared me, but I loved reading them, so I would just stay up really late at night until the murderer was caught. And I loved all kinds of books, and I've always read since then. And probably like a lot of people, it comes and goes. Once I was older, and especially in the phase when my children were really, really young, I didn't read nearly as much because every time I had a free moment, I tried to sleep. But generally, I'm a big reader. Although I never had an ambition to be a writer per se. But after I moved to Iceland when I was an adult, I kind of fell into doing travel writing and different kinds of journalism here in the country, because there was a few publications that were written in English, and they tended to focus on issues that were of interest to travelers and visitors to Iceland. And I got into it that way and really enjoyed it. And then I used to edit Icelandair's in-flight magazine for a few years, and got to travel as well there and write various travel pieces. And so maybe my experience in profile writing has also helped writing Secrets of the Sprakkar, because there's so many different women who I interview in the book and who I profile. So, absolutely, when I was growing up on the hobby farm in Canada, I had no idea that I'd be married to the president of Iceland. But, I think that's just one of the wonderful things about life and how unexpected it often is.
Wonderful, wonderful. And since your focus in the new book is on gender equality, can you also share a little bit about how you were first inspired to become an activist? And especially now that you're a mother, you have, I think, 3 boys and a girl, how you educate your children about it?
Mm-hmm. I have 3 boys and a girl, and I have an adult stepdaughter who was very young when I first met her, and she's now turning 28 this year. So she is a grown-up woman, and also a writer, actually. And I, I don't think that I kind of woke up and decided I wanted to be an activist, but the issue of gender equality has always been important to me, and something, I've always defined myself as a feminist. I always used to, complain to my parents if I felt that they were treating me as the only daughter with a double standard compared to my brothers, for example. And once I became First Lady, I realized gradually that, I had this platform that what I said got more attention. And I guess I thought, well, I kind of might as well use this. Well, at first I was a bit nervous about saying anything because I didn't want to do something wrong and I didn't want to make any mistakes. But then I thought, well, I'm not going to be First Lady forever. So I might as well, make the most of this opportunity. And in a sense, writing this book is kind of an extension of that. But I, always when I've been serving in this role, I've tried to be uh, open and really tried to confound expectations of what a quote unquote First Lady should look like or act like or do. And part of that is talking about issues such as gender equality.
Yeah, it's
Oh, and you
really
asked about my
interesting.
kids too. Sorry. And look at all these claps. Oh my gosh. I didn't realize how exciting that would make me feel. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Um, you were asking about my children. Absolutely. It's a value in which, we're raising our children. And I think especially because, as you said, I have these three boys and then my daughter is my youngest. And we very much now think these days that okay, we have to raise our daughters to be strong and independent and confident and capable, and we mustn't compliment them on their appearance. We have to compliment them on this or that, and we have to teach them to be independent and all of this. But we focus, in some senses, less on our boys in certain situations. We also are trying to raise our girls to say, watch what you post on social media because you have to be careful people say, and be careful when you go out because this or that could happen. And we're putting so much of the burden of responsibility of say safety and consent and respect on our daughters and not necessarily on our sons. I mean, if we're talking about aggressive behavior online, or if we're talking about issues of consent, we should also be, teaching our sons to maybe not ask for those kinds of photos or do things like that. So that's really my children are younger. My oldest son only just turned 14, but I still, even from a young age, you can start to talk to them about various types of issues and, say, oh, look in the newspaper. It's funny. Why are the women in that movie, I'll joke and say, she's got such a short skirt on him. She must be very cold, running all around like that in such a short skirt. And the men are wearing so many things. And boy, why, she's crying that this bad thing has happened. I don't know why he's crying. If I were him, I would cry too. Wouldn't you cry? And just kind of trying to bring up these different ideas to sort of change around the stereotypes a little bit. Sometimes they roll their eyes at me and say, like, Mom, I just want to watch the movie. But
Yeah, well,
I
they are
persist.
kids, right? They got to do that. But it reminds me one time when my kids were younger. My kids are 35 and 40 now, but you pick up the things that your parents used to say. And one time I told my daughter when she was younger, I said, "Christine, you're not acting very ladylike." And she said, "I object to that. Have you ever once told my brother you're not acting very gentlemanly like?" And I thought,
Mhm.
yes, right? Oh my God, I wasn't even aware of that. And so,
And
this
said,
little 8-year-old child pointed that out to me.
yeah, no, I was often that somebody said to me, when I was young, oh, that's not a very ladylike way to sit or something. And I would say, well, I'm not really much of a lady, I'm afraid. Who knew I'd become a first lady? But that's a whole other story, I guess.
Yeah, and speaking of First Lady, I just wanted to mention to the audience that yesterday, Eliza and I had a brief chat in the green room so I could kind of show her the features of Fireside. And I kept calling her Eliza because I'm always on a first name basis with the authors I interview. And after I hung up, I thought, oh my God, I was just talking to the First Lady of Iceland and I was referring to her casually as Eliza. And I apologized profusely. I said, what am I supposed to call you? She says, call me Eliza. So just for the
We're
audience
all,
members who are wondering about that, I'm not being disrespectful. I just wanted to bring that up.
Absolutely. And, not only am I an informal person to begin with, but in Iceland, everything is done by first name. So kids call their teachers by first name. You go to the doctor and you call her by her first name. And, the president is called by his first name. So I'm very, very used to it here, too, in this context.
Wow, that's interesting. So even teachers and doctors and presidents. Wow, interesting. Okay. So gravitating over to your book. First of all, can you tell us the meaning of Sprawcar and what it means in Icelandic culture?
Yeah. So the word Sprakkar is obviously not an English word, it's an Icelandic word. And I really wanted to find an Icelandic word that I could use in the title of the book, that wasn't sort of so complicated that it was daunting to people. But that there's this Danish word, hygge, that did really well. There was books a while ago, a Danish word called hygge that means sort of coziness. And I kind of wanted to capture that. So I was kind of searching out for words, and a friend of mine pointed me out to this word Sprakkar. Sprakkar is actually a plural noun. The singular of the word is sprakki with an I. And it's a masculine noun that means outstanding women. And it's a very old word and very obscure. We have a word that is more common now called forsprakki, which means sort of a leader that can be applied to either women or men. But this word Sprakkar is only for women. And immediately, I was like, this is the perfect word. People can say it, and it's great. But then I found out that it's really obscure in Iceland. So you can look in these databases to find out when they've been used. And it was used in some kind of a magazine article in like 1918, and then in a couple of 19th century poems. And then, hundreds of years before that. So I actually called a language institute here in Iceland and spoke to the director and said, is this okay? Is this a legitimate word for me to use? Because I was a bit nervous that I would get criticized here in Iceland for kind of making up a word. But she, thought this was great. And so when the book came out just before Christmas in Icelandic translation, because everybody sells their books before Christmas in Iceland, and there it's just called Sprakkar. That's just the name of the book. And people were quite excited to see, like, what does that mean? Where does this word come from? And so it generated, I think, generally positive dialogue. And if we think about it in English, here's this word, Sprakkar, only applies to women, and it means an outstanding woman. And if you can think of all the other words in English that we have to describe women, I would like someone to type in the comments if they can think of any positive words, because nobody really can. And I'd like to know, but there aren't so many that we have for women that are positive. And this is a really positive word. So
Yeah,
I
and
hope
I
that we
like that. And I think we could have a whole show just on gender equality in language. I mean, I think of the term women's fiction, which drives me crazy because we don't have a men's fiction. Why isn't it just fiction or, more genre related? But
Mhm.
that's a
Absolutely.
whole
I know.
nother rabbit hole we're not
It's
going to go
like
down
there's
to
the
today.
norm and then there's the women's thing. And, it's something else I point out to my kids. My son, this made me so happy one day, saw an ad in the paper, and again, in Gender Equal Iceland. And he said, Mom, look, it says, basketball and women's basketball. And it should say men's basketball and women's basketball. And I was like, yes, good. I'm glad you noticed.
Yeah, and your son, by the way, was so cute yesterday when we were doing our rehearsal session. He was running back and forth behind her, carrying her book, and he said, "I just want to advertise your book, Mom." And oh my gosh, as a mother, my heart just went out. I thought it was the sweetest thing ever that he wanted to
They
promote that for you.
they've been so patient as well, because as I was mentioning, my oldest actually got diagnosed with COVID this week, and so he's in the basement of our house in isolation, and he's fine. He's not sick, and the rest of us are in quarantine, so we can't leave the house. So normally for events, I go. There's an official residence kind of right next door that I go over to, which has a very nice professional background, but I'm not allowed to leave the house. And my home office is in the basement where my son is in isolation. So I've been kind of hopping around different rooms in the house, and all of the other family members who are also in the house, I'm like, I'm doing an interview now for the book, everybody be quiet. And that was the last one last night, and I told him I was done, and so he went around.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that he got COVID because in Iceland the vaccination rate is well over 90%.
Yeah,
Correct?
Yeah, but it's this, it's Omicron, everybody's, getting
Everybody.
it. But that's probably why, because he's fully vaccinated. As I said, he had a mild sore throat one day, and that's all he's had, knock on wood. And,
Yeah.
the rest of us also.
Yeah. So, as for your book, you break it down into chapters that examine Iceland's attitudes towards women, which is interwoven with interviews with dozens of Sprakkar, right? So, without
Mhm.
speaking about each and every one of them individually,
Sure.
because we do want people to buy and read your book, I want
Mhm.
to know if there are one or two in particular that really resonated with you or that
Mhm.
stood out.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I mean, they're all wonderful, and I'm so so grateful to all of them. It's hard to pick out a couple, but before I will do my best here now, and before I do that, I guess I would sort of speak to the idea behind this was just, I wanted to write a kind of a love letter to Iceland and illustrate what it's like to be a woman here. And I just thought that although there's a lot of stories in the book that are my own stories and my own anecdotes and background, and I hope that the tone of the book is like speaking with me. Like I hope you feel like you've gone out for a cup of coffee with me and we've been chatting, and it's that sort of informal, even though it's also informative about Iceland. So I didn't want to write a book of policy histories on feminism in Iceland, and I wanted to just capture all these different voices of different women. So, and they all sort of cover different aspects of society. So let me think of a couple. As you said, I don't want to talk to too many. One who leaps to mind is a woman called Heather Goodney, and she is a farmer and a sheep shearer. And she lives alone on her farm, and her farm is the size of the British Isle of Guernsey, the Channel Island. So it's a huge, huge farmstead. It's kind of about, it's in the bottom part of the island of Iceland. It's several hours drive from Reykjavik, which is the biggest city in Iceland. It's and you'll excuse me for not being very imperial, but it's 24 kilometers from Iceland's most dangerous volcano. So she does her farming there. It's been in the family for hundreds of years. There has been a farm there for 800 years, and over the centuries, obviously, occasionally this volcano would destroy the farm, and then the farmstead would get rebuilt. And I went to visit her there to speak to her about what it's like to work, as a farmer and a female farmer and sheep shearer. And I said, what's it like to have the farm next to this massive, volcano? And she was very calm, and she said, well, if I spent all, if I kept worrying that there's going to be an eruption tomorrow, I'd never get anything done today. And, I thought that was it's like very sort of stereotypically Icelandic, like, let's just all stay calm unless there's something that we need to worry about. If there's a volcanic eruption, I will deal with it. And she was also great because there was a story about her. She's a very beautiful woman. And several years ago, a relative of hers worked for a modeling agency and asked her to go to New York to do a couple of modeling shoots, get some photos taken. So she went and she had a nice time, and then she went back to her farm, which is, she's always wanted to be a farmer. And the BBC at some point came to do a story about her because she's also very active in environmental protection. And the story headline was something like the model turned farmer, and painted her as this big like runway model who then, tossed it all in to go on this farm, which is my sense is completely not that she'd always lived on the farm. She thought she'd have this fun adventure for a couple times, and then she went back to the farm. So it's really interesting how that's played out. She's an interesting character. Then there's a group of women that I spoke to who also live in the countryside. The oldest is 87 years old, and the youngest was probably around 60. And they were all members of these women's associations, which is probably a bit like what you might see in a sort of old, church association, something in the States where women, especially in the countryside, would volunteer. They would make the coffee and the drinks after funerals. They would fundraise to raise causes for charities. They also offered grants actually to sort of housewives grants so that really rundown moms could take a week off by themselves, and they would sort of pay for them to go to a hotel, which I love that idea. And so I wanted to speak to them about, the contribution that these women's associations are making, even nowadays in society, and how important it always was for them, especially decades ago when there was fewer communications. And I drove up to their house, and they invited me for coffee. And when I grew up in Canada, and if I want to invite somebody for coffee, I'll have them over, I'll pour them a cup of coffee. And if I have maybe some cookies in the freezer that I've made, I might serve them for them. But in Iceland, if you get invited for coffee, it's like a massive meal between a meal with a week's allocation of sugar. So I went in, I drove up, and they were absolutely wonderful, and they had all kinds of pointers and statistics and information ready to give me on what they had done. And then they had this whole table laid out with olive spreads and tapenades and different kinds of breads and crackers and cheese and jam to put with the crackers and the cheese, and a huge pavlova with meringue and caramel sauce on top, and three different kinds of cakes, and a tiny bit of very strong coffee with all of that. And I remember they greeted me so warmly, and we had such a nice discussion that's one of my favorite meetings as well.
Wow, my
The
mouth
rest
is
you have to read about in the book.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of the book, if you want to get a copy, you can visit the middle portion of your screen where the fortune cookie is, and visit our website, adventuresbythebook.com, and you can get your own copy of Eliza Reid's book, Secrets of the Sprakkar. So let's talk a little bit about Iceland's history and what you know of. Why is it that Iceland is number one in the world in terms of gender equality? How did that develop and when? I mean, was it always that way? Is it a newer development?
It's been number one in the world, according to the World Economic Forum, for 12 years in a row. So we're doing pretty well, I guess you could say, although everybody in Iceland will say, but we're not there yet. It's not a gender paradise. We are doing a lot of things. And I think it's no coincidence of the fact that we are number one in the world in gender equality, but we are also the world's most peaceful country. We are also the world's, out of the OECD countries, most welcoming to LGBTQ people. We are also one of the happiest countries in the world. And I think that, a lot of these things go hand in hand. Um, the question as to why is, of course, the $1 million question. But I think and I try to explain in the book, I think it's really a combination of different things. I think a lot of people, especially in the States, will see right away that policies such as parental leave, affordable childcare have obviously facilitated things a lot. They facilitated a much closer involvement of fathers in their children's lives, and also increased female participation in the workforce. And Icelandic women have one of the highest rates of participation in the workforce in the world. But I also hope that I can come forward to say it's not just laws. I should also add there's laws on gender quotas on boards of publicly traded companies. So there are also some laws to increase women's involvement in the corporate sector. But it isn't just about laws. I think it's about the fact that as a society, we've moved beyond discussing whether gender equality, trying to achieve gender equality is an important objective, and to debating how we should try to get there. Because, study after study, time and again, shows us that the more gender equal a country is, the more prosperous it is for people of all genders. Both, men and women live longer in more gender equal countries. They are more happy, they are more prosperous. So this goal isn't, women at the expense of men. This goal is something that is elevating everybody in society. And, we're a small country here. And I think it's easier, both it is easier to kind of make change, but it's also then easier to see those changes happening. But I'm hoping that with this, it can inspire people elsewhere to be a broader message than saying, yes, legislation can be important, but part of that as well is living our lives with these gender equality glasses. And that means, exactly taking, seeing art and culture and books with gender equality glasses, pursuing careers like Hey the Farmer does, regardless of what our gender is, being role models for other people, and elevating other people and listening to their voices, and taking up space, being like the Women's Association to say, now I'm going off to spend this time with my friends, and I'm allowed to be doing that. And being respectful of each other in media, and paying attention to how women are represented in the media, and not leaving any groups behind. I have a whole chapter on immigrants in Iceland, but that's not just to do with immigration. It's to do with women of foreign origin, and women of color, and women with disabilities, and queer women, and non-binary women. And all of those things factor into to furthering the goal of gender equality.
Yeah, and I love all of this. My concern though is, there's power in numbers, and you guys are doing a great job, but Iceland is a really tiny country. So, how does the rest of the world follow suit? Where do we
You
go?
know, and I think, I'm not trying to kind of lecture anybody else to say we do it this way and so you should do it this way. But what I'm hoping, rather, by the fact that most of the book is these stories of other people, to inspire and entertain. Because, gender equality, it's such a huge issue. I feel a bit sometimes, it's like the climate crisis. When I'm trying to go to sleep at night and I can't get to sleep because I think that's everything, the planet's being destroyed, what are we doing? And I can't as an individual do anything. um, that's the type of thing that we need to do with gender equality, because we are all individuals. We can't leave it up to everybody else. We have to be role models in our own community. We have to elevate each other's voices. We have to make sure we're with everybody, and we can all have that influence within our environments and our communities. And we are all consumers. We are all consumers both in terms of what we purchase and what we are reading and what we are buying and what we are talking about. And when we are aware of that, when we run for office ourselves, when we speak up for various issues, when we write articles, and when we go to women's sporting events as much as men's sporting events, that has an influence.
Absolutely. And I was just looking at our live audience, and it seems to be, which I'm very pleased about, equally represented male and female. And I'd love actually for some of you to come join us on stage and ask some questions or have a conversation with Eliza. I want this to be a conversation. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what she said so far about gender equality. And I'd like to hear from both the men and the women. So all you have to do is click that little black button on the left lower portion of your screen and invite yourself up on stage, and you can chat live with the First Lady of Iceland. I mean, who gets to do that? So I think, thank you, Chris, for joining us. And Chris Rossetti has just joined us on stage. Did you have a question or a comment for Eliza?
Yes, real quick. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I'm Chris Rossetti in San Francisco. And I'm here to say I don't believe in gender equality because my wife is far superior than I am. She's she's a much greater person than.
Well, we're not ranking individual to individual here.
Oh, okay. So there's hope. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm here to listen and to learn. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and
for
thank you for
joining
logging
us.
in. And I also am so glad to see men tuning into this debate. If there's one kind of disappointment that I had when the book came out in Iceland in the fall, and I was doing book signings and going to events, and people would come up and buy the book, and all the women were like, "Oh, I'm not going to give this as a Christmas present. I just want it for me. If you can sign my name." And all the men would say, "This is for my wife. This is for my daughter. Or this is for my mother." And I kept saying, "You can also read it. I hope that you find it interesting." It's, yeah, there's something that there's this still association that gender equality is somehow a women's issue, somehow women's responsibility. But not only do I disagree with that assessment, but I hope that men will find this book interesting too. There's a lot of informal anecdotes in the book that I used to illustrate. So, I talk about my husband and when he was taking his paternity leave, and there was a story where when we had our son, just the one son, and he was taking paternity leave, but I was working from home, and he was going out for the day, and he told me, "Oh, I'm going to go to the archives," because he's a historian. He said, "I'm going to go to the archives, and then we're going to go to the parents' morning, and then we're going to do this and that." And he had like a plan for the day, and he had the baby with him, and he had a stroller, and he had nothing else. Like, he had no food or water or new diapers or anything. And I looked and I kept wanting to resist the urge, thinking, okay, and he has a daughter before me, so he's the more experienced parent. And I kept thinking, like, don't be that person who's like, "All right, you're going to do it like this, can't you do?" But I couldn't say. I finally just had to say, like, are you going to bring something with you? And he just sort of was like, "Oh, I'm going to stop at the store on the way and buy a banana for him." Like, as if that, and then that's it. there'll be no problems. And, of course, the whole day went by and there were no problems. Everything was totally fine. And even though a little part of me was sort of wishing that there'd be like a diaper disaster and I could lord it over him, but no, it was totally fine. So there's a lot of little stories like that as well in the book.
Yeah,
I had to come back and say one more thing. Is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Forgive me, I'll be very brief. That reminded me, what you were just saying was, I was a salesman. I used to call on grocery stores. I would sell gourmet food to grocery stores. And so I was in stores, I was around people all day. And when I came home, I didn't want to do anything, have nothing to do with people, So my wife would tell me, honey, can you help me with our newborn baby? Can you help me? Can you go to the store with me? I don't want to go back to the store. Why would I go back to the store? And I'd say it. She'd say, please. And she went on like this a few times. And finally, one day I said, honey, I see women with their babies in stores all day long. And I said, what do other women do? She looked me in the eye. She said, some of them shoot their husbands. So I went to the store. I went to the store with her. And anyway, so I'm learning. Thank you.
No, that's great. I think that's very fair. And I think, there's a lot of things, especially when it comes to parenthood, and maybe Chris, you can talk on this more. I think we set the bar too low for men. I think that does men a disservice, that we have these low expectations of what they can achieve. Every time my husband and I obviously travel together a lot more than we used to, because, for instance, we go on state visits or other formal occasions, but we try to really minimize any kinds of trips where both of us have to go, because we have all these children at home and we think it's good to have a parent with them. But every time that I have gone alone somewhere for work, someone says to me, oh, who's looking after the children right now? And I am sure that no one has ever asked my husband that question when he is alone on his trips.
Or how many people refer men as babysitting their children, rather than just parenting your children. That's part of this. Yeah.
Right. Or asking them, when they're alone with them or not, they every day, like, how are you doing with the kids? Is everything all right? Do you need, or do you need me to bring a lasagna over for them? Or, whatever it is. I can think, no one asked me that, but okay.
Yeah. Thank you for your questions and comments, Chris. And I know we have a couple other people joining us on stage. Deanna, hi, welcome. Do you have a question or comment for Eliza?
Actually, I have a question. So I'm a firm component that, change starts with you, right? And, me becoming a better mom, a better wife, a better person in the community, a better boss, allows that change to ripple out from there. So I was going to ask, what is something specifically that individuals can do on the lowest sub level here? Because I think the change has to happen from the bottom up. And I think us in the United States are a little behind the curve on a lot of things, especially things like paternity leave, or things like that, where men aren't even given the opportunity to explore those sides of themselves. And to be a part of that, it's very new here. So what is something that you would recommend that we could do, like on a very base level, to make sure that we are encouraging this and doing it the right way?
Thanks for that question, because it's a really great question, as you say, that, we can think, oh, gee, it'd be great to have paternity leave where I live. But you can't be the person who introduces paternity leave, probably, unless you're, in that legislature to do that. And so as individuals, I mean, I guess if I take a step back, away from specifically an issue such as parenting, I would say there's a couple of things that, especially as women, we can be looking at. And I think one of those are the expectations that we put on ourselves. This idea that here we are, say, a 40-year-old woman, and I need to have a spotless home. I need to have children who have very limited screen time and the perfect extracurricular activities and do very well in school and have excellent clothing. And I have to have excellent clothing myself. And my hair and makeup need to be very good. And my relationship needs to be perfect. And I have to go to the gym regularly because I'm going to be in perfect shape. And I have a wonderful and fulfilling job that is also, very ambitious. And I have a lot of friends who I spend a lot of time with and I bake for when they need something, and I support everyone. And that person cannot exist. I mean, I don't think nobody can do all of those things.
No, I
And
agree. The Pinterest presentation that's got to go away.
seriously, that's so true. I always want to post my other photos of like, this is what, like, I love baking, for fun, but I've never done anything that looks like anything on Pinterest. And I think, there isn't one or two or three of those things that are more important than the other things. What is important is that we choose for ourselves, what we want to prioritize and what balls we want to drop, and that we feel comfortable with that. And that can switch. But, at different times in our lives, there's different demands on different areas. But what is completely a waste is all the emotional energy of wishing, thinking, well, I did XYZ today, but man, I didn't get to the gym at all. And why didn't I get to the gym? And now I'm going to be out of shape because I didn't get to the gym. And then I shouldn't, and now I'm having an extra beer and I shouldn't have the beer and it's that time that you're spending. If you don't have time to go to the gym this week, just accept it, because you've done all these other things. And then maybe next month you'll go to the gym a whole lot, and your kids will have had way more screen time and they'll probably still turn out fine. So I think, coming to terms in our own lives with what we want to prioritize at different points is really important. And, if I looked at when I was writing this book and I had deadlines, and, sometimes my kids say, oh, please can do something with me now. And I have to say, no, I have to finish this chapter. And I don't win Mom of the Year for doing that sometimes. But at that moment, I had to finish the chapter. And then when the book was handed in, I could spend more time with the kids. And, that's just how that is sometimes. So I guess that's one thing I would do. And I guess the other one has to do with kind of pushing our own comfort zones somehow and feeling confident to use our voices in some way. And by that, I mean, I think we all have insecurities, and sometimes we feel like, though, we're the only person who has this insecurity or the only person who has encountered this particular challenge. And then as soon as we tell somebody about it or talk about it, we discover that there's a lot more people who have had that situation or that occurrence happening to them. And by somehow talking about it, we can provide, support to each other in ways. And, in a much bigger context, we look at, say, the Metoo Revolution. That's happened here in Iceland. There's constantly new situations. And the more women who come forward, who take the courageous step of coming forward with their stories, the more other women feel like they can come forward, and the more like perpetrators feel like they realize that this is, unacceptable behavior and are actually, having to become accountable for their behavior. So those are a couple of things that I think we can kind of work through in our own lives that will then make, women's voices heard a little bit more. And especially when we're trying to elevate and listen to other women's voices, and think about what kind of podcasts you listen to, what kind of books that you buy, and are we listening and reading and consuming media by people who are just like us, or are we listening to the stories of people who are different than us and who have had different challenges than us or more challenges than us, and maybe that helps us understand the world a little bit more. And to give you a really long answer, and I'm sorry, Susan, I don't know how many questions are waiting. Back specifically, or maybe more to parenting as well, I think, I don't think it behooves anybody to have these low expectations for men in parenting. I mean, I don't think that I don't think that women are somehow better parents than men are. And I think that, we're all individuals, and we need to work through this together. And, this parenting ties into this idea of the mental load as well. And even though we're, I think, more societies in heterosexual relationships, we see that maybe men and women are taking on slightly more evenly the tasks. It's always disproportionately the women more who are kind of the task masters and the household CEOs. And, maybe you equally take out the garbage or equally unload the dishwasher, but maybe it's the woman who remembers to actually do that, or to buy the birthday presents, or, to go to the bar mitzvah. And so I think that, we need to also kind of shift that as well. And that's both men stepping up to do things, and that's also women being willing to have other people take over some of these things, even if they're done in different ways than they might be expecting.
Agreed. And, we've got to lift each other up as women, but also it really is important that those men get out there too. In fact, and I'd love to see a He Too, a He Too movement in addition to the Me Too.
Well, My husband actually is what's called a he for she ambassador with the United Nations. And there's several male heads of government or heads of state who are these he for she ambassadors, which are exactly men who are sort of publicly in the discourse to promote further gender equality.
That's great. Great.
So, can
Fabulous.
I add one other thing? So, I just, because you touched on this and I appreciate it so much, is bringing into this conversation that Me Too or the sharing of your story. That's a specific field that I work in with
Okay.
women, based on my experience and going through my own trauma and sharing that, and to help people to recognize that they have a voice, that they are seen, and that it is okay, that they are not broken, and that they can move forward. But the support coming down from the celebrity sector,
Mm-hmm.
and the support that's coming through different various governmental agencies and movements that are going on right now, has made it such a platform for women to be able to express that now I'm getting men who approach me who have actually experienced the
Mm-hmm.
same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, like you said, approaching gender equality, I feel like we have to recognize that even though there are things that lean certain ways for certain genders, that we are, like you said, individuals and we are humans, and sometimes those things cross those boundaries. So I love the he for she. That's amazing. That's amazing. So thank you for letting me speak. I'm gonna move
Thank
myself
you
back
very
down to the
much.
audience.
That's a wonderful insight and an empowering statement.
Thank you for your questions and your comments, Deanna. And I know Stephanie has been patiently waiting on stage, and I'm so delighted to welcome her because she is the slayer of disinformation. So she's a perfect person to come up here and have a chat. Hi, Stephanie. Nice to see you again.
Susan, thank you for inviting me to the conversation. And I'm going to do my best to address you as Eliza. It is hard for me because, first of all, I just have so much respect for you. I'm very familiar with you. I've watched you from afar. I come from decades in politics in the United States. And so Iceland has always been such a fascinating history to me. And then certainly with your leadership now in just exactly the spaces that we're talking about. Liz, I'm wondering how you think about, the history in Iceland is fascinating in terms of how women were taking on more, like the United States would see, sort of more gender roles that associated with men, running the household, the finances, etc.
Mhm.
And that even there were laws in the history of your country associated with you would never hit a woman, you would never express violence towards a woman. As a matter of fact, as a man back in your history, you would have like a horrible death if you ever hurt a woman. So it's fascinating when you look at the history. We definitely don't have that history in the United States. And without creating like a war between Iceland and the United States, I'm being silly. But Eliza, as you sit where you are, I've watched some of your TED Talks. You're a phenomenal speaker in your TED Talks. How do you see, and how much attention are you really paying necessarily to the United States relative to gender equality? I think that we certainly see moments in our history that we are taking steps forward.
Mhm.
I think that with some of the things we're doing in the States, we are trying to have women better represented.
Mhm.
I think some of that has backfired a little bit, to be honest with you. It's just the consequence of living in a society. How do
Mhm.
you see? Certainly, there has been progress in the United States, but how do you see it through your eyes of
Mhm.
coming from a country that not only understands the data
Mhm.
associated with gender equality, but understands the benefit that you
Mhm.
reap economically and otherwise? How do you look at the United States right now? And I'll thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you for the question and the background. And yeah, there's a little story in my book as well about one of these women from history who lets her husband die because he once hit her before. So I'll let people read that in the book. But it's a great question about the US because, I've never lived in the US, but I grew up next to the US, obviously. Canada is 1/10 the size of the US. As a former prime minister of Canada said, it's kind of like a mouse, living next to an elephant. So, all of the movements that happen, you're aware of. And probably from growing up there as well, I'm more familiar with the history and politics to a degree than, say, many people who grew up in Iceland are. Obviously, but I've never lived in the US and, I've traveled extensively there. But I think it's interesting here because there's so much potential in the US as well. This is the land of opportunity, and it's a country, as an outsider, where I see, it's a really national ambition to feel like you have a right to achieve whatever you want to achieve and to kind of live your full potential. And it's a country where, a global leader in all kinds of development and change and all of this. So, in some senses, if any country is really going to achieve something fast and really, really, really invest in it and do it, you'd think it could be the US. It's not. I don't want to comment on politics in the US or not. I think it really depends on big thinking political will. But then what I was talking about, also these little changes, if we can also be kind of cognizant of how we are walking through society with these gender equality glasses on, and it takes time, but the more we see that, the more we see women who don't feel guilty because they went back to work with their kids, or women who don't feel guilty because they didn't go back to work with their kids, or there's a whole chapter in sexuality on the book, and so women who aren't slut shamed for picking up a man late at night in a bar and going home with him and never talking to him again. And all of those things factor into equality. And how do we see it from outside? I think there's a lot of strong female leaders in the U.S. as well, and hopefully there's a lot of potential there. And I don't mean, I think many of us think of politicians right away, but there are, your soccer team, the women's soccer team, which I do have to add, Canada won the gold medal at the Olympics this summer. And I had to
yes, they
be a
did.
little nationalistic there. I'm very sorry. And then I'm going to sound Canadian and apologize for that. So I'm sorry. But, your women's soccer team members are great role models and leaders for, they're outspoken. They are talented on the field. How great for other people to see. And I don't mean, just for our girls to grow up and be like them, but for our boys to say, like, I want to go and see this sport. It's fantastic and really fun to watch and support.
Eliza, thank you. And thank you so much for gracing us here on Fireside and joining Susan today. It is an honor to have you here. So thank you for the conversation, Susan. I'll place myself back in the audience, but thank you so much for being here. Thank you both.
Thank you, Stephanie, for the great question. And just a reminder, our time is winding down, but if you want a chance to chat with the First Lady of Iceland, that's the great thing about Fireside, is you can actually sit in the comfort of your living room and chat with the First Lady of Iceland. Who gets to do that? You do, if you invite yourself up on stage. So come on up, and we'd love to hear from some of the men in the audience too. Chris already came up on stage. And also a reminder that in the fortune cookie, you can see the link to purchase a copy of Eliza's book, Secrets of the Sprakkar, this beautiful blue jacket here, which matches her lovely yellow sweater. And I want to see as many men purchasing that book as women. And I want you to read the book before you give it to your wife. So,
or buy another copy for your wife. I mean,
I like that too.
It's not so sustainable, but I'll be selfish in this moment.
I like it. Well, Mother's Day and Father's Day, you can think ahead, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so what do you want people to get out of reading your book, Eliza?
I think I want people to kind of feel inspired. I want them to a little bit fall in love with Iceland like I have, but that's not not the primary function. It's not a tourist guide, but I want people to feel, galvanized and inspired and optimistic and feel like, we can move things in the right direction, and I can make a difference in that change, and I can have an impact. And, there's a thread in the book about my experience that I, grew up on this farm, and all of a sudden and really almost literally all of a sudden I'm first lady of a country. And what do I want to do with that experience? And do I want to fit into some kind of a mold of what people expect me to do? Or do I really want to have an impact in the way that I want to have an impact? And so hopefully it can also, I hope, inspire people to really make the most of unexpected opportunities and to really help think of the bigger picture and elevate each other and support each other.
That's a great message, and I think people will get that message out of the book. Thank you. But before we go, I want to hear a little bit about the Icelandic Writers Retreat, which is a world renowned program that you founded or co-founded. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because it is coming up in a couple months.
It is. I would love to tell you about that because it's my professional baby. My dear friend, Erica Jacobs Green, who is an editor from the US, and I started this event. We had the idea 2013, and our first event was held in 2014. Erica used to live in Iceland, and that's how we knew each other. And her husband works for the State Department, so now she's in DC. But we wanted to create an event for people who like to write, and whether that means that they are published authors or trying to be published authors or academic writers or tinkering in a diary, it doesn't matter. We thought we would bring over really well-known writers to teach small group writing workshops on the craft of writing, not how to get an agent or how to sell your book, but developing character and editing and all of this. And combine those small group writing workshops with tours within Iceland, literary themed tours. So Reykjavik, Iceland's capital, is the world's first non-native English speaking UNESCO city of literature. And there's a wonderful long literary heritage in Iceland. Everybody loves books. It seems like half the population writes a book. And so we have these tours through Iceland's nature with these hot springs and geysers and waterfalls and safe volcanoes. And the tours are led by a writer, and we'll stop on the way and we'll have a reading. And then we have a pub night with local authors and music, but we also have well-known writers teach. So in the past, we always have different writers, but we've had Geraldine Brooks and Adam Gopnik and Barbara Kingsolver and lots of different writers from the US and from around the world who've come to teach. So yes, this year, after one canceled year in 2020 and a virtual event in 2021, we are optimistic and gunning for in person. And we're having our first event also called the Iceland Readers Retreat this year, which is running concurrently, which is again for people who maybe aren't interested in writing, but they love reading and love meeting authors. So people who attend the Iceland Readers Retreat, we have a special guest, Adam Gopnik, the New Yorker staff writer, who's been with us before. He's going to do a lecture on his oeuvre and on memoir in general, just for these people. And we'll have a special panel of Icelandic writers in various genres just for these people. And they'll get a tour of the Icelandic saga manuscripts and then have extra day tours and trips combined. So you can go to our website, icelandwritersretreat.com, if people want to go. I'll give it a plug there. And we are full steam ahead for an in-person event at the end of April this year. Although obviously, we follow everything closely and follow all safety and COVID precautions and everything like that.
It sounds amazing. Well, I've been talking to Eliza for months about it. I'm just chomping at the bit to go, and I don't know. I may end up going this year, but if not next year, for sure. It sounds amazing. And I think it's a good thing Iceland is so cold, because it sounds like such an amazing country to live in. That's the only thing that would stop me from staying.
It's not that cold, though. I mean, I guess it depends on where you are. It's way warmer than Canada in the winter, and it's much warmer than New York or Boston in the winter. The average January temperature is 0 Celsius. So what's that, 30 something, like freezing?
Yeah.
In January, but it does not get hot in the summer. I will acknowledge that to anybody, that you don't need to bring your sandals or shorts to Iceland.
Well, in closing, since we don't have any last questions, what is something, because you kind of live in a fishbowl as a first lady, right? So what is something that people may not know about you that they might be surprised to hear, or would be a fun fact?
Gosh. Well, I feel like you're getting all this, because I usually have to do all these events at a very formal looking, residence. And now I'm like hanging out in my private home, which we never ever show publicly, but that's what we have to do. So I have this IKEA chair. That's a sort of private fact. I don't know.
You sing, right? Is that something?
Pardon?
You sing.
I do sing. That's true. Well, not so much now, but I had a choral scholarship when I was at university, what did that mean? That meant that I got free singing lessons, and then I sang in a choir. And then when I moved to Iceland, I joined a choir. I like to think it was the best. It was an audition amateur choir and a good choir. And it was also helpful to me because I was trying to learn Icelandic. So, and they have the names of the notes are different in Icelandic. So they don't call things, B flat or F sharp. They have like a different name for those. And they don't call B, they call it H. So I'm not quite sure why. So even though I can read music and I would be going to the practices, and I was always that little bit behind people because I wasn't quite sure when the conductor was saying do this or that or the other thing. But I recommend choirs for just because it's good for the soul. But it's also good if you're learning another language.
Sounds great. And so where can people find you if they're looking for you? Do you have a website, social media?
I have all of those things. I have a website which doesn't have very much, but if you need to go to it, it's elizareid.com. And then Instagram and Facebook are Eliza Jean Reid, at Eliza Jean Reid. And then I have Twitter, but and I put in my sign, I'm a Twitter slacker. But I do have it. It's Eliza J Reid.
Okay, Jean as in Jean or Jane?
Jean, Jean. Yeah.
Jean. Okay, great. And also, as I mentioned earlier in the program, you can click on Eliza's icon here up on stage and follow her so that anytime she comes back to Fireside, and I hope she does someday, you'll be able to get notices of those. You can also click on my icon and get notices of our upcoming events. Our upcoming events next week, February 9th, with debut novelist Bobby Jean Huff. And then we have our upcoming 5-part series, Conversations on Race, with Emmy Award-winning television director and author Jeffrey Blunt. And I hope you can join for that. It's going to be a really powerful and interesting conversation. So it's been a pleasure chatting with you, Eliza. And congratulations again on your new book, Secrets of the Sprawcar, which is available on Tuesday. Again, one last pitch. If you want to buy the book, the link is in the fortune cookie in the center of your screen, adventuresbythebook.com. Pick it up for yourself, the men in your life, as well as the women in your life. And
thank you to all of you who are there watching because, as Susan mentioned, this is my first book and it's my first, English language book event. And so thank you so much for asking questions and asking really great questions. So thank you very much.
Yes, we're honored to have you all in the audience, those who are in the live audience here, and also those who are listening live on our public profile page or on our social media platforms. It's been an honor and a delight chatting with you. Best of luck on the Secrets of the Sprawcar, on the Icelandic Writers Retreat. If I don't see you there in person, it'll be next year. I'll be there for sure. So thank you again. Thank you to our audience, and have a great day, everybody. Until next time, what is your next adventure by the book?
Thank you.